Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now, you may remember a couple of days ago, I did a video which was called, and I'll just bring it up on the screen so you can remember it, Changing the Oath and Why a Petition Was Flawed, or at least in the words of Clive Edwards and myself, actually. And this is something that a gentleman called David Bizley has arranged, a change of the oath of military and the police, which is garnering views and signatures rather. And I thought it was very honourable to let David come back on the show and tell us his version of events and why he wants to do this, and also to come back at our opinion of why we thought it could be flawed. So, David Bizley, welcome to the show. It's lovely to have you with me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here and to be with you.
Yeah, no, and thank you. And I saw the video, and a number of my viewers had sent me the original video that you put up, saying that you wanted to change the oath. And of course, people were saying, "Richard, what do you think? What do you think?" And I thought, "Oh, all right, I'll do a video." Then I sent it to my friend Clive, and he said, "Well,
Sure.
it's a very honourable thing to do because." We're all trying to find freedom from the tyranny that we're in, but he thought there was some elements that were flawed because of the jurisdiction that we put ourselves in. I will leave a link to that video so that people can see those arguments. However, this is really for you to tell us about the petition, why you put it together, and what you thought about our viewpoint.
Sure. Well, no, thanks for the opportunity to share. I mean, basically, I want to come at from the direction of purpose. And ultimately, I don't have all the answers. I probably have more questions than answers. But it seems to me that our society, our form of governance, is not working. And, many people in our society are frustrated by it and are looking at our society and saying, what is wrong? And I think sometimes we have to go and not just look at the symptoms, we have to look at some of the core issues in order to ask what is wrong with our society. The petition as it stands, it is a draft. It is a suggestion. So I would say don't get too caught up with the wording at this point in time. It's literally just a vehicle by which we can start a conversation about who makes oaths and to whom are they made, and what is the content of that oath, those oaths. And so that's kind of my purpose in putting that petition out. I don't expect for instance, the Labour Party to act on it within this administration. There was a lot of disappointment with the petition for a rerun of the general election.
Yes.
And 3 million people signed that, which is great. I signed it myself. And there's been a lot of dissatisfaction afterwards that, it didn't seem to go anywhere. Well, I didn't sign that petition thinking that Keir Starmer would suddenly pack up shop and the Labour Party would pack up shop. It was a way of registering our discontent with the way that Keir Starmer had bring in policies that he made no mention in his mandate and his manifesto, and was coming at us from left field. And so, if we're going to view petitions, and again, what is a petition? I know in the video you guys were asking the validity of the petition. Well, for me, it doesn't matter whether it's called a petition or a public memorandum or just an opportunity to have a brainstorming session. That's basically how I see it at this point in time.
Right.
Just getting a conversation out there. But it does seem to me that our system of governance at this point in time is reaching a natural expiry date. That is my opinion. And if I can give you a little bit of background as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I've only been on YouTube since the summer of last year. And the reason for that was, it was the back end of the general election. And I'm always sharing with other people, and people say you need to share your thoughts wider. And so I've always not done that. But the general election was the catalyst, if you like. And I voted for reform. I was disenfranchised by the Conservative Party. 14 years of broken promises and misrule as far as I'm concerned. And, that's not an isolated opinion. Many people feel the same way.
Yes.
And when the Labour Party first came, Keir Starmer won the election. My first video actually was was almost complimentary to Keir Starmer. I said, okay, well, it's a new change of the guard. Let's give Keir Starmer the benefit of the doubt and let's see what happens. We're in a democracy and we have to honor that. Well, it didn't take long for that bubble to burst. And now a lot of my videos is addressing, the manic policies that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are trying to push through. So I have three main concerns for the future. Or maybe not concerns, maybe I will vocalize them as visions for the future.
Right.
The first vision is that we recognize where we are in time and space and in history, and recognize that there's something essentially wrong with our system of governance. And as such, we need to ask questions about it, and we need to either recalibrate it, which means we maintain a form of constitutional monarchy as we have now, but we definitely recalibrate it, or we totally remodel it. And, we get rid of the monarch as the head of the state and we just remodel it. Or we do something in between. I don't know. And if we do ask the honest questions and we do recalibrate or remodel at this point in time, then we have a chance, in my perspective, of handing on to the next generation some form of normality, some form of democracy. Now, all forms of government are inherently imperfect. So we have to choose the best one that's going to work for us. And all systems of governance evolve over time as well. And, our history is a point in case. So I think we're coming to a point now in our governance, it's breaking. It's not working for us, the citizens. And therefore we need to ask honest questions and we need to recalibrate it or remodel it. So that's my first vision. And if we do that, then we'll have something to pass on to the next generation, to my children, to my grandchildren, to your children, to your grandchildren. And therefore we can, leave this earth when that time comes, knowing that we've done what we could do to pass on some system of normalcy to the next generation. The second vision that I have for this nation is one in which political Islam usurps our present system of governance and becomes the dominant force in our society. And if that were to happen, and I don't think it's an if so much, it will be a when if we don't recalibrate. If we don't address this issue of political Islam and its influence on our society and its influence on our political system, then sooner or later, it will become the dominant force in our political arena. And that will end in oppression. That will end with the end of democracy. And, we just have to follow political Islam's history throughout its last, 1,400 years, and most recently in modern history to see what's happened in places like Iran, Lebanon, now Syria, to see the modern history of how political Islam takes a stable society, such as Lebanon, for instance, and creates chaos and civil war. So a future in which political Islam is not going to be good for anybody, especially for Muslims who simply just want to worship God according to their understanding of their concept of God. So, this is about all faiths. It's not about, I don't have an issue with Muslims. I have an issue with political Islam. So that's my second vision, is that we are facing a society in which political Islam will take dominance. And the third vision that I have for this nation is there may come a point where if we do not recalibrate now or remodel now, there'll come a point in which society as a whole will be so frustrated with the political system and so frustrated with the increep of political Islam that the only logical course that will happen will be civil war of some form. It might not be, as we normally call civil war, but it will be some form of civil war. That's my apocalyptic scenario. And so I want to avoid vision 2 and 3. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is kind of putting myself out there, putting my thoughts out there, and saying, no, we need to recalibrate now. Well, we need to remodel now, because whatever's happening in our society, it's not protecting us. It's not defending what we are calling democracy, our constitutional monarchy. So that's the reason for my channel. That's the only reason for my channel, ultimately. And all the other stuff that I do is peripheral to that and works towards that end. But I'd like to ask another question, which is to do with purpose. And that is why we do what we're doing right now in terms of constitutional monarchy. And I think, for you to ask many people, and as an illustration of your video in response to my petition, maybe the first response of a lot of people, especially people with a Christian ethos, would say because it's a biblical model. And then maybe the second thing people will say is because our constitutional monarchy has been a glue for our society, that it's been a form of identity for us. It's been the thing that's held us together. Well, I would like to challenge both of those purposes, really, and say that, well, it may be a biblical model, but it's not a good biblical model. In fact, what do we know that God says about monarchies? And, the British monarchy has really been established and modeled and symbolized very much on Israel's monarchy. A lot of symbolism has been borrowed from the Old Testament and from Israel's monarchy. And in fact, there's also a train of thought, which I don't accept, that, Anglo-Saxons are the lost tribe of Israel, and that the monarchy has got a direct lineage somehow to the lost tribes of Israel. I don't accept that at all, but that's kind of the myth and mythology that is around the British monarchy, that it's styled on a biblical pattern of what it means to have a king and a kingdom. But what does God say in his word about monarchies? Well, the first time that the people of Israel asked for a king is recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 8. And they come to Samuel, the prophet, and say, we want a king. We want a king just like all the other nations have a king. We want to look like all the other nations. And we want a king that is going to ride with us front and center into battle. That's the reason why the people of Israel wanted a king. They wanted to be like all the other nations, having a king and a kingdom, and they wanted a king that was going to lead them in great exploits and lead them from the front into battle. What was God's response? God's response was, basically, this is a bad idea. Don't do this. Okay. And he says to Samuel, okay, my people, Israel, they are my people. I want them to live as free people, as me as their king. And God uses this word. He says, they've not rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me in asking for a king. And therefore, and then God in 1 Samuel 8 gives all of the reasons why having a king is not a good idea. In other words, you're going to be the property of the king. The king is going to tax you. He's going to take your land. He's going to take the best of your crops, the best of your persons. And it's not a good idea. And it's all going to end in tears. That's what God says. And, at the end of that passage, he says, you're going to cry out to me at the end of it, and I'm not going to hear you because I told you it was a bad idea, and yet you went ahead and did it anyway. But because you're free people and because I honor your autonomy, I'm going to let you do it. And I'm going to allow Samuel to go and anoint somebody. And that was obviously Saul. We know it's interesting, isn't it? Because Israel had a period of the United Kingdom, the Northern Kingdom, and the Southern Kingdom, which appeared from like 1000 BC to 586 BC when they went into exile. And it's interesting, and I just throw this out here because some people might be interested in numbers and numerology, and I'm being a little bit naughty by doing this, but it's interesting that Israel had a total of 42 kings during that period. And it ended in exile and in tears. And if you were to look at the 42 kings, Saul was, maybe he started off good, but we know what happened to Saul. Then you had David, and then Solomon, maybe the golden years. And then after that, out of 42 kings, we had 6 or 7 that the Bible records as good or half decent. The rest were either not good, good, bad, and the ugly was kind of the, description of the kings after that, and just downright tyrannical. And it ended with Israel going into exile. And it's interesting that when Israel comes back into the land after the Babylonian period, that they're not too hot on kings anymore. They're looking for a priesthood to lead. So anyway, I throw this out here because, since 1066 and the beginning of the feudal age, which was the Norman period, was really the beginning of the feudal age. The Anglo-Saxons monarchy had a different system, which was not feudal, although it was a hierarchical system, but it wasn't feudal. When William the Conqueror came, he said, okay, all the land is mine. Every inch of England is mine, and I'm going to dispense it to who I want. And that was a feudal system. Well, since 1066, we've had, up until King Charles III, 42 kings. Interesting. So I just throw that out there. So is this the expiry date? Is my question. So my first response is yes. Earthly kings and monarchies are a biblical model, but the scriptures say themselves that it's not a good model, that it always ends in tyranny. It always ends in tears. And if we were to look at England's history with kings and queens, it's been a tumultuous relationship. And there's been a history in which the English people have had to take power from the king consistently and limit his power and restrict his power. Kings don't give their power willingly unless they're forcibly told to or forcibly made to. And so that's our history as a nation. And it's also a history of Europe and a history of the world, that we recognize that actually kings don't give up power unless they're told to or made to. And ultimately, it's not a fair system. So
can I just jump in there to say that in Clive's point of view was that there were two systems in place. One in which the king, who at the coronation is taking his oath to God, is playing two roles, one of which is to serve the people, so actually he becomes subservient to us as the people, or ought to, and the other one is to have subjects, which would be the public, the citizens, the residents, the commoners, and all of those who need looking after because they're unable to look after themselves. And I think what Clive was trying to get at was that the king has these two roles, but in recent years, he hasn't had to use the role as our servant anymore, because none of us, and I think that's through some fraudulent system set up in the 1930s by the people like the Rothschilds and others, have made us all believe and understand that we are persons and not people. And they've forced us into this role with legal fictions and all of that business, that we are then under the control of councils, under the control of government and legislation, and ultimately as subjects of the king, rather than the people of this landmass Britain, which actually have the power. And we have accepted that responsibility of being persons by getting onto the electoral roll. So he sees the king having these two roles, that there are two areas of jurisdiction. It's just that we all think that we're in, and we've agreed that, kings, we're going to have a second god or a smaller god rather than the creator or the one, the universe, whatever you want to call God.
Mm. Well, yeah, I would, in response to that, I would say there's a hypothetical situation that you've got there and a practical scenario. In theory, that seems to work great, but in practice, it doesn't.
No, I agree. In practice, it's not working because people don't know who they are.
Well, I would say in practice, it doesn't work because ultimately we're looking to a person who's a fallible individual. And that I think sometimes we look at our British constitutional system with rose-tinted glasses. And, we've had probably the privilege of growing up under the reign of Queen Elizabeth II and, before that, King George VI. And, we've, to a certain degree, had peace in our times. And there's also been an explosion of technology, an explosion of relative wealth. But if we were to look at the history of us as a nation, having a monarch has not been a fair system. I mean, even if we were to look at the system after the English Civil War of 1688, the Bill of Rights, and, Charles II being put back on the throne, I would say that we missed an opportunity there to do, to truly remodel. In fact, I would say that for 300 years, we've been trying to put new wine into old wineskins, trying to maintain an old system or the appearance of an old system that didn't work, that wasn't fair, that was promoted as a biblical system, but actually is, God himself says it's a poor system. And we've tried to make it work. But is it a fair system? As I said, in modern life, we've had relative wealth. But if we were to look back in our history, this is the system that gave us debt prisons,
yes,
and workhouses. This is a system that spent most of its time engaged in territorial and resource wars and harnessing the young blood of our nation to go and fight those resource and territorial wars around the nation in the name of the king.
Yes. No, I don't think that. I mean, I don't think Clive or myself doesn't really have an argument with the overall approach that you, not so much the approach, but the overall aim that you want to get to, and that the whole system needs looking at, definitely. I suppose going back to the petition, which is the thing that sort of ignited this, it's the system of you're using the existing broken, corrupt system to try and fix it. And it seems to me that any party going into government, however it works, is, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government gets in, that will always be corrupt. And it seems everybody thinks the only way to change what we have is to use the current system, and they can't seem to think out of the box and say, well, perhaps it's a completely different system, not government as we know it, that a different system altogether to be our servants and help administer those things that we need to administer.
Sure. Well, I would certainly agree that, we need, as I say, a total recalibration or a total remodel. But in my mind, we're not going to get that by going backwards and by looking to our constitutional monarchy as a form of exit.
So how would you do it?
Well, I would pick up a statement that you said that that the people can't look after themselves. I would disagree with that. I think that God gives us as human beings the innate gift of autonomy.
I certainly don't disagree with that, and I think that we, as whatever we are, human thing, whatever this soul in a flesh body is, I absolutely think that we have everything on this earth that we can use to look after ourselves. Only,
sure.
My point would be is that the majority of people have been dumbed down, that they are reliant on all the services. And we can see where it's going, in which universal credit coming forward, where we're all just being paid a basic rate and we don't even have to go to work. So we're not inspired, we're not creative, we're not all those things that we inherently should be and are, has been flattened out of us. So I'm not saying that we're incapable of doing it. I'm saying that a majority of people they don't even know they can do it. They don't know that they can be responsible.
As you say, it's been a policy, certainly that I would identify since the 60s, in which I would say that there's been strong Marxist thought that has gone into our academic institutions, and that through that has filtered into every institution in our nation. And that has created a dumbing down. I mean, the oxymoron of Marxism is it tries to claim democracy, right? Or build a democratic system, but it always ends up with oppression.
Yes.
But I would say that ultimately, that because God has given us the gift of autonomy and the gift between knowing right and wrong, that actually we can build society without a king and without a monarch. And that at this side of history, this side of eternity, so far, the best model that we have discovered is democracy, true democracy. And I would say that actually the glue that has held us together as a nation throughout history has not been our constitutional monarchy. It's actually been the ethos that we've had as a nation that has been built around Jesus Christ's teachings in the New Testament, our Christian ethos. And so I would say that, whether we had a monarchy or not, we still identify as a people because of that Christian ethos that we have had throughout history. And that has been the glue that has bound us together. And that I also have an issue with the term Christian nation. I think that's impossible. If you want to take the New Testament scriptures with integrity, then it's impossible to have a Christian nation. Because the whole thing about being a Christian is a volitional act. And the teachings of the New Testament makes it very plain that you're not born a Christian. Your Christianity is not dependent on your geography. It has to be a volitional act. And so at no time in our history have we ever had 100%, 90%, 80%, maybe even 50% of the population genuine disciples of Jesus Christ. So to say that we are a Christian nation is misleading. I like to use the phrase that we've had had a Christian ethos. And because of that Christian ethos, that has been a fence for us. It's been a guiding light for us. And it's been a benefit to us. It's prospered us. It's prospered the whole of Western society because of that Christian ethos nation. And the whole thing about Marxism, of course, is its hatred of Christianity. And it's tried to remove that Christian ethos from our nation. And that's why we've lost our identity. It's not because we've lost our identity because of the monarch. We've lost our identity because of our Christian ethos has waned, because it's been on purpose. There's been a strategy to remove our Christian ethos from our nation, because the Marxists within our society recognize that Christianity is an obstacle because it celebrates the autonomy of the individual.
Although you wouldn't really say that we were a Christian nation, or not that we were a nation of Christians necessarily, anymore, because people aren't going to church, people aren't going to organised religion,
yeah.
And of course people are discovering different faiths from across the world, or different spirituality.
Yeah,
and,
we are
and
a post-Christian nation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's, we have to understand that we are a post-Christian nation. We have to accept that and be honest. And so moving forward, therefore, we have to ask ourselves, if we are now a post-Christian society in which, even if we use the term God, many people have different understandings of what that means. People
quite naturally, I guess. I mean, how would you define it? I mean, you couldn't mandate what people think God is, could you?
No, well, I think, the best form at this point in history is recognizing that we are reaching a natural expiry date in our form of government. And now we need to change. We need to change to a secular form of government, which there is a separation between church and state, and that we have a secular form of government that protects freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But if we continue in this kind of...
How would that look like? I mean, when you say a secular form of government, how would that look like? Because democracy in and of itself is flawed because it's mob rule.
It is, well, that's a very pessimistic view.
Well, put it this way: if you've got let's say 5 people, one of them's a woman, and 4 of the blokes want to rape the woman, and they put it to the vote, the mob win.
Well, and ultimately, that's part of one of the visions in which I see society going. All I'm saying is, at this point in time, I do not believe that our form of constitutional monarchy is going to protect us from an apocalyptic future like that. And that if we pretend that somehow the system of governance that we have right now and our allegiance to a king is somehow going to protect us from unsafe laws or from the increep of ideologies that want to usurp our society, then we're kidding ourselves. We need...
Well, I don't think Clive was saying that we... I don't think in the arguments that Clive was putting forward is that we have an allegiance with the king, that we are saying we are under the king. The king is under us. And he is pointing out that there are 2 systems, one in which the people tell the king and subsequently his government and ministers and everybody else what to do. That's the people are in charge. The only subservience that the people have is to the creator, whatever that is. You have other people who need looking after because they're just not capable of doing it. Perhaps that might be the infirm or the people who just want to do their own thing, or the wrong uns. They need somebody to look after them, to say, you mustn't go around murdering people, or you mustn't go around taking people's property. You need a system that looks after them, and that is where the king has the second, and his ministers and government and everything else looks after them. But we, in theory, according to Clive, should be able to say, look, king, you are our servant. This is what we want you, and as head of government and head of state, to sort out. We don't want net zero policies, 5G, fluoridization, spraying in the skies. You must get off your thing. But what is happening is people are going to the king as subjects, as commoners who are in the other camp, and they're saying, well, until you recognize that you are in the right camp, you're basically ants asking me not to put boiling water on you. And that you need to shift over into the other way. It's not saying that we're looking at the king as the ruler, because the people should be the rulers.
Yeah, well, for me, it's circular reasoning. In the sense that we do not have a true democracy. We have, I would describe it as comfort blankets. So we have a system of governance right now in which we elect our members of parliament, and from the moment they are elected, pretty much it seems that they can do whatever they please.
Well, they can. So, I mean, the thing is, if you join the electoral roll, you've put yourself on the monopoly table as a player rather than as a real one of the people.
Well, part of the circular reasoning that I see, and it's just an observation, is that we now have a system of government in which those that we've elected to be lawmakers, once they're in that position, just seem to do whatever they want to do without true reference to the citizens, to the people. And they get to make whatever law they want, and then they get the monarch to sign it off. And then the monarch gets to say, well, I didn't make the law. And the parliamentarians say, but yes, I didn't approve the law. And so we are being fed this idea that somehow there's checks and balances within our system, that the people are being looked after because ultimately we have a king who's going to veto laws that are not in the national interest. But it doesn't happen in practice. The last time the king actually vetoed a law, I believe, was in 1708 or something ridiculous. And if we were to look at our history in modern history, there's certainly laws that we'd have hoped that our king would have stepped in to say this is not within the national interest.
I suppose if you put yourself in the position of the king and his parliament are coming up to him and saying, here is a law that these people who have elected to, by joining the electoral roll, to be subservient to us, want and have agreed to by electing us, this is what they want, to govern them, as opposed to people who are different from persons who there's just not enough people. I mean, genuine, real people, because we're all legal fictions. We've all got birth certificates which we think is us, and there's not enough people to say to the king, excuse me, king, that's all very well for those people who've joined the electoral roll and are part of the system, who've joined the game, but I'm not in that game. I'm over here under God, under the Creator, and I'm not in your system. So we're telling you and your government, none of that policy actually applies to us.
Well, as I understand it, since 1981, we are citizens of the state, full stop. We're not subjects of the king.
Well, we're not citizens. I mean, not all of us are citizens. A citizen is part of a city, is a Roman.
Well, it's a Roman thing. The definition is a member of a state.
Right.
And 1981 was an act of parliament. Therefore, it's a statutory law that supersedes common law. So ultimately, right now, the king is literally just a figurehead. So it's all theory, but it doesn't work in practice. And
well, it does for some.
It's sold to us as some sort of comfort blanket.
Yes, I mean the other argument is it does work for some.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's the history of Britain, right?
I don't mean the elites. I mean some people who've taken themselves out of the jurisdiction of legislation are not in the system, and because they're not in the system, they're not under acts and statutes. I mean, it all comes.
Okay, but how does that actually benefit you in real life? Let's say you've removed yourself from the electoral roll. How does that actually benefit you in real life? So you're divorced yourself from society as it is in your mind. You're not going to pay council tax. Or the Bible says we need to pay tax because render to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God's. If we're going to live in any form of society, we have to recognize we're going to have to pay tax in some shape or form. We just want it to be fair tax.
I think Jesus said that to pay tax was not a good thing.
I didn't say not paying tax. There's always been a form of tax, even within the...
Well, it may well have been a form of tax, but I believe, and I can't pin to it myself, but I have seen the thing that Jesus said that to pay tax was not correct because you are effectively funding smaller gods, pretend gods, demigods, whatever you want to call them. God doesn't need funding. He's provided everything. He's provided the earth.
Well, the one time that Jesus speaking into a political scenario, which was, that taxation issue, he's talking about rendering to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God. He's making a statement about living in a society in which we live in a political world.
Right. So if you're rendering to Caesar as a citizen, That's fine, because you've said I'm a citizen, so therefore Caesar is your boss. But if you're rendering to God what is God's, God's is a much lighter way.
Yeah, sure, but we are in the world.
But if you're not a citizen,
we have to live in society. We have to live in a society, and all societies are political to one degree or another. You can't get away from politics. It's impossible to live within society and not be within a political system of one shape or another, because that is the nature of human beings. It's interesting that Jesus Christ ran away. Well, didn't run away, but he rejected every form of attachment to politics himself. And any opportunity it was to make him a political figure, he rejected that, because he was very clear that his message was that his kingdom was not of this world. And he said to his people, you are in the world, but not of the world, but that still means that we're in the world. So while we're in the world, we have to work with the systems that are in the world. And it's very interesting that in the New Testament, there's no place in the New Testament where, Jesus or the apostles are encouraging the Christians to usurp the Roman rule. On the contrary, the admonition there is to work within the system, to recognize that while you're on terra firma, you're going to have to live within society. You're going to have to live in some form of political system in one shape or another.
So it sounds like you're saying that that's the only system that you can have.
Well, this side of eternity, it is a political system. Yeah.
Right. Well,
political.
I can't. The difficulty is
the other option is living in a theocracy, which ultimately becomes a political system as well. And we're not going to achieve theocracy this side of eternity. It's not going to happen. So, if you want to remove yourself from the electoral roll, or if you want to not pay council tax, fine. But how does that actually benefit you? Is that going to stop the policeman knocking on your door if you post something that, some Marxist policymaker decides is offensive? No, it's not. So
why?
How does it protect you?
Why would it not protect you? If the police have two roles, which I believe they do, one as a police officer and one as a constable, one under serving the king for the people as a constable, one controlling the persons as a police officer, as a policy enforcer, you're in two different jurisdictions. It seems to me that you cannot see the distinction between the two jurisdictions.
I can see what is practical. I can see right now that for me, you're talking about something that's very theoretical, that does not work in practice. And ultimately, you can go down this road about talking about constitutional law, about what is a people, what is a person. But since 1981, we are citizens of the state. That's the definition. We're not subjects of the king. And, we can go around in circles about that, but it's a statutory law.
Well,
so
I don't want to be a subject.
Are entitled to form a democracy.
Right, but I don't want to be a subject of the king or a citizen, and I don't consider myself either. I am a soul in a flesh and blood body. I am a spirit. I am not a defined person with a legal fiction name. That's just not what I am. Now, people can be, and as you say, God gives us a free choice to make our decision who we serve. You can serve a pretend God, the government and everything else, and be in that system if you so wish, or you can go to the Attorney General and say, I have attorned from your system, and I am of the people. I am basically recognizing who I am and what I am, that I am a soul in the body.
Okay, so you stop paying your taxes, and the government comes after you for not paying your taxes. I mean, you can say all day long that, I've removed myself from the electoral roll, etc. It's not going to stop the agencies of the state.
But the agencies of the state at the top of the state understand the definition. Why else are they sitting there taking oaths to God? Why are they called ministers if they are not adhering to the higher authority? Why is every course of 5-year government starts off in Westminster Abbey? Why they've got prayers every day in the House of Commons?
Well, those prayers in the House of Commons are attended by very few.
Well, it doesn't matter that they're attended by anybody, but the fact that they have them.
The point is, for me, is Richard, is that it's all a charade. You can call on God, you can meet in Westminster Abbey, you can, call on God before the beginning of Parliament. Unless you have a conviction that God is your creator and you've got a personal relationship with him, none of that is going to alter your policy making. For me, there's two types of freedom. There's one that is freedom, spiritual freedom or innate freedom, which, I draw as a Christian. You probably draw as a Christian. And so my identity is innate. That nothing can change that. My circumstances cannot change who I am as a spiritually free individual under God. Nothing. You could throw me in prison. I would still be a free individual. I'd be freer than the prison guards, okay? Because my freedom is not dependent on my circumstances. It's dependent on who I am and who I am in spirit and my relationship to God. And therefore you can change my circumstances, and you can even put me in a situation where other people say he's not free. And I'll tell you, no, I'm free because I am spiritually free. I'm innately free because of my relationship with God. And so there's that form of freedom. And then there's political freedom, which is definitely dependent on your circumstances. And the two are two different types of freedom. And I think we have to understand that they are two different types of freedom and not to confuse them. And to understand also that Jesus Christ in his message was speaking primarily, not even primarily, solely to the first form of freedom, the innate freedom, the spiritual freedom. And as soon as we try and confuse that with political freedom, then the waters get muddied. And then we get a system in which things get so confused and complicated. And let's face it, our constitutional monarchy and our parliamentary system is so complicated and so muddied that, the fact that we're having this conversation shows, it is a complicated system. How many people truly understand all of the, common law, statutory law, etc., the role of Parliament and the role of the King? It's a complicated system, and maybe it's been made complicated on purpose. I don't know. My point is this: there's two types of freedom, and we have to recognize that innate freedom is different from political freedom. But if I'm going to live in the world on terra firma, I'm going to have to recognize that I'm going to have to pursue a form of government that best facilitates and enables my political freedom, because my political freedom can never satisfy my innate freedom. It doesn't matter what form of government it is. It's never going to impact my spiritual and my innate freedom. It's never going to make an impact on that. So now we have to choose a form of government that's going to best serve political freedom while we're living in the 70 years that we have. And for me,
hopefully a bit more than 70.
Well, yeah, I'm talking the biblical context. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll all live to 100, right? 120. But so for me, it's about, if we're going to talk democracy, let's have a proper democracy. Let's not have this pseudo democracy in which oaths and default allegiance is given to a king who's not actually doing anything anyway.
How do we get there? I mean, that's the ultimate thing. It's all really saying, well, this is what we want.
We get there by starting to have a conversation and recognizing where we are in time and space and recognizing that something is wrong. I don't have all the answers. All I'm saying is where we are right now, it's broken.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with you that a lot of people are beginning to sort of see, and I think Mr. Starmer is doing a very good job of helping people to realise that the way the government is run is not particularly useful or beneficial to ordinary everyday folk.
Yeah. And we can thank Mr. Starmer for that.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing a great job. All the time that they're continually giving us, nice little treats and things, we kind of believe that they'll get better. But I don't think we ever believe that the system at the moment is ever going to get better. And we can see it's a rather murky way forward if we rely on that. But I also believe that, as you, I think, alluded to early on, is that we're about to see all of this collapse anyway, because there just will come a point where it seems to the monster is eating its tail.
Yeah.
It's just got so bad that
you've referenced it already. I mean, I often say on my channel, I'm not a fatalist. Things are bad. Dystopia and chaos is all around us. But, what we've got to stop doing is navel gazing and saying, woe is us and Britain is finished. And, it will be if we keep navel gazing and having a fatalistic attitude, but actually this is an opportunity for us to recalibrate, an opportunity to remodel. And if anything, Keir Starmer is doing us a favor, because he's probably waking up more people now than ever before. Because, the policies are tyrannical. So,
well, exactly, and it has to get. I mean, we've been so reliant on the government doing so. I mean, look at the farmers; they've been conned into taking these subsidies so that they are the poor man of industry, and a charity case because food has become so cheap now that they can't even produce it at the rate that supermarkets want to sell it at, and he's penalising them left, right, and centre. And we need to see probably more of that, because we've got so used to everything being done for us. We don't do anything for ourselves. We don't even get rid of the rubbish anymore. Somebody comes along and takes it down, and we get a bit of a moan if it's going to be outside our house for a few days.
Yeah, and relative wealth.
Yeah, and you go back a few hundred years and people were slopping out and chucking things into the street. We used to do a hell of a lot more. We sit and watch well, I don't, but people sit and watch Netflix, or they watch this bald bloke with glasses on YouTube. And everything seems a little bit too easy. And until things get very difficult for us, will we actually go, hold on a second, this ain't right? And I think Mr. Starmer's leading us down that path to waking us up to what is actually our responsibility.
Yeah, totally agree. And, I think, as you just said, things will probably have to get worse before they get better. I'm sitting in a room right now, which hopefully is going to be my studio. This is the first time I've ever done a podcast, by the way, so this is a monumental day for me.
Yeah, well done.
So this is going to be hopefully my studio, my room, whatever. Although I do love being outdoors, and a lot of my stuff is done in my garden. But I was looking at this room, and it's got damp problems. So I thought to myself, well, I could do something with superficially and put it back together, and it would look great to all the viewers, because it would just be covered. But I thought I'd better use the opportunity to knock it all out and get back to the brickwork, and the good old rustic brickwork, and start from scratch.
Yes.
And I think how long is this process going to take me? Who knows? It might happen next month. It might happen within 6 months. We'll see how long these bare walls remain. But the point is that, if we're going to deal with the issues, oftentimes it's not enough to deal with things superficially. We have to get to the root issues and the root causes. And all I'm saying, and listen, I don't have the answers. I'm just asking questions. All I'm saying is perhaps one of the core issues is the oath that we make to the monarch. Maybe that is a core issue. It's very interesting to me that there is not a single oath made by any parliamentarian, any officer of justice, or our military that is to defend democracy. There's not a single oath that includes the defense of democracy. But yes, interestingly enough, when you come to the citizens' oath for naturalized citizens, the citizen makes an oath of allegiance, and then also an oath or a pledge of allegiance. And in the pledge, interestingly enough, there is a small statement that says that, I will honor British values and democratic values. Now, that's the only oath that is made in a public context which mentions democracy in any shape or form. I find that very interesting. And that's been since 2002.
But so I can't say for you, but you're going to tell me, I've never taken an oath to the king. I've never taken an oath to anyone.
Well, and that, for me, that means I'm not his subject. If I make an oath to the king,
right,
then I'm his subject. If I don't make an oath, then I'm a citizen.
The only contract that I have made with the government is joining the electoral roll.
Right.
And that to me is pretty much similar to saying, yes, I'm agreeing to all government policy and everything else, and I'm giving them license to now control me by joining the electoral roll.
I would see it differently. I would see it as my right as a citizen to participate in society. That's how I would interpret it.
But can you not participate anyway without having to sign up onto something?
Well, I think ultimately, we are human beings. We like to sign somewhere, don't we?
Well,
that's how human society works.
Yes, but our signature is a very important, or our autograph, however you want to describe it, is a very important mark that we make with our body through our soul into a commerce world, a world of commerce.
Well, I think, you may have a point. I think making an oath, though, is 100 times more important.
Well, yes.
Making an oath is a spiritual act.
Yes,
And
so far we haven't had to do that.
No, and so because I've not made an oath to the king, I don't regard myself as his subject. Those that have made an oath to the king, I believe technically they are his subjects.
Well, that's exactly it. And I guess, I mean, I have to round this up now because time is running out. But that again goes back to Clive's point: is that if the military and the police are giving an oath to the king, who is under us as people, not as persons,
but not in practice.
Well, I'm not saying that this particular king is a particularly good example of it, or indeed the queen before it. We've seen how they do all sorts of very strange things, like the queen signing above the oath.
Exactly. Well, we can look back.
There's a lot of corruption. I absolutely agree. There's a lot of corruption in there, and people may have images of the queen being kind and benevolent, but I absolutely don't think they were.
I think if I can just say in closing. For me, it is about changing the oath, removing the king from the oath. And, I don't know all the legalese. I don't know whether that means we can remain a constitutional monarchy or not. But for me, it is about either removing the king or at least inserting, the very minimum that we need to do is insert a principle of democracy into those oaths. And so those who are taking oaths recognize that they are defending democracy. Now, for me, I think we should get rid of the monarch altogether. But the very least we need to do, as some bright spark in the civil service recognized in 2002, because he obviously had a light bulb moment and said to himself, hold on a minute, we've got all these people coming into the country that are coming from countries that don't honor the rule of law and have got no understanding of democracy. We better put a little clause in there into the Citizens' Pledge for Naturalization that they are going to honor the rule of law and that they're going to honor democracy. So if some civil servant recognized that was the fact in 2002, then I would say that needs to be incorporated in all of the oaths that officers of any capacity and elected officials make. There must be some commitment to a form of democracy in the oath because it's a spiritual act, as you said. And if we do that, then I believe we can start to enact laws that defend democracy. Right now, we have no commitment to democracy in our oath. None. So,
I come back to the whole mob rule thing about democracy. It depends how you're defining democracy and how democracy technically actually works. Because if you were that woman and 5 blokes want to rape you, you would argue that the democracy is not working for you. It's worked for everybody else, which is great. But the minority has had a bit of a hard time.
That ideology that wants to achieve that is a minority at this point in time. The majority...
But if you're persuaded that 5G is a good thing, or you're persuaded that facial recognition is a good thing, and the majority are said to vote for it, you're going to have it. But if 20% of the population say, actually, that's an infringement of my rights, I don't want it, they're stuffed. The democracy will mean you've got to have it. Well, then you've got no choice to say, I want to live in a separate society.
There's no form of government that's going to be perfect. I just think a genuine democracy is going to be better than what we have now.
All I'm asking is, what is a genuine democracy?
Well,
how do you define that?
In the Republican setting, it's for the people, by the people.
But not all the people.
And any system that we can get to that improves upon that statement is surely beneficial to our society.
We had a so-called democratic referendum to leave the EU. Forget all the shenanigans that have gone on since.
Yeah.
And 52% said that we want to leave, and I was one of those. Quite happy to leave. Thanks very much. However, it still leaves 48% who were saying, "Hang on a second, what about us?" And that it does seem a very unfair situation. Because I'm not trying to sort of say that they should have. We should have stayed in or anything, because I'm glad we didn't, although, you can argue that we're still in it. But my point is that when it's 50-50, you're going to disenfranchise half of the people with such referendums. Even if it was 80-20, you still got 20% of the population, which is still several million, who would be saying, well, what about us? What choice do we have? And that seems to me one of the biggest issues with democracy. Now, I'm not talking let's have a dictatorship. We've seemed to have got that with Mr. Starmer at the moment. But to have an oath to democracy as it is at the moment might be a step too far, certainly for myself, because I can't define what that democracy really means.
Well, it needs to have a conversation, and that's why I'm putting this out there for the people to discuss it.
To have a conversation. As long as it's not navel gazing, as you said, we'll be
all
right.
I know is what we have right now is not working, and I'd rather work in a system which is pursuing a genuine democracy with all of its imperfections and foibles than the system that we have right now, which is completely and utterly failing us. And so
no, I agree. I mean, I do. We share a lot of agreement in all our conversations. Yeah. There's only certain points that we're sort of perhaps coming at it from different angles.
As I say, there's no system of government that we're going to have that's going to be perfect. We have to accept that. You know, every system of government is going to fail us in one way or another, or there's going to be sections of society that are not going to be happy with it. That's just human nature. That's history. It's about choosing a form of government that best serves the political freedom that we want to pursue as human beings. And for me, that is
paramount.
A genuine form of democracy and allowing the people to decide. And at this point in time, as I said, the majority of Great Britain want the rule of law. They want to be ruled by rule of law imposed upon our society and not anarchy. Therefore, we are in a position right now to recalibrate and form a genuine democracy that is going to be healthy.
I must pull this to an end, but you mentioned anarchy just now. I interviewed somebody in Poland a while back, a year or so ago, and he was talking about where he was just when the Iron Curtain came down, and for 2 years, I believe it was, there was no government and anarchy reigned. But it wasn't anarchy as in everybody's running around. There was just the people ruled themselves. And he said it was the best time that ever happened because people helped. But actually, people's morals and ethics suddenly came to the fore. They realised they had to take responsibility. So if somebody's fixing his roof, somebody says, "I've got a ladder for you." People actually, she said, it all went tits up when the government managed to get back together, put in martial law, because no one was paying the taxes anymore. And the government realised, well, there's nobody in charge. They've discovered that they don't need us. And so, I don't know, anarchy might be a very sensible suggestion.
I know we're wrapping up, but can I just make a comment about that? Is what the illustration was Poland, right?
Yeah.
The illustration, well, Poland is a very deeply Catholic country. So again, there's a Christian ethos that is going to be an undergirding for people to recognise that I have to help my neighbour. Now, if you were to take that policy to another country and remove government, you would have anarchy and tribalism and death and destruction on every corner. So it's about what is the underpinning ethos to a nation. And so, that's a different conversation, but
No, it's ethics and morals and what's right and what's wrong. You know, that's, as you say, a different conversation. But David, you have a YouTube channel. I was watching it earlier this morning before we came on. I will put the link to that. What's it called? Just for those people who are desperate.
Just my name, David Bizley, Bizley.
And they can go and find out more of your ideas and keep that conversation going. I will put a copy of the oath into the description as well as your channel and the interview that I did with Clive Edwards so that people got all the information. They can keep the conversation going. I think it's a good one. It's worthy of discussing. After all, we don't want to keep navel gazing and all of that. David, thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure.
And thanks for coming back. Be interested in your comments, ladies and gentlemen, so do put them down below. In the meantime, I will be back with more wonderful guests and, of course, my monologues. Till next time, from David and I, thanks for watching. Goodbye.